The Week in Bible Prophecy, a Prophecy Watchers podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to the podcast today. I am sitting here with my good friend Graham, all the way from England and the UK. Welcome, Graham.
Thank you, Mondo.
Many of you might know Graham from some other podcasts we've done, or really series we've done. What was it? I even forgot the name of the series now. It's
Whose land is it anyway?
That's right, Whose Land? So we've done a lot on Israel. We've talked about, that's right, the modern, we did, 10, 12 sessions on the modern founding of Israel and its history from all the way back. Whose land is it? Going back to God, to Abraham, all the way through to modern times. And also we have here on our desk a UK flag, an American flag, and an Israeli flag. And in that other series, which we're not going to get rehash that here, but what we're going to ask today is Israel an apartheid state? And we're going to get there. But the flags that we have here, you mentioned this a little bit earlier. Why do we have these three flags here?
So very briefly, I thought we were doing an Anglo-American summit, with Israel, because really what I'm trying to recover is, we've mentioned this before in private, and that the Israel story, the modern state of Israel story, is a British story even more than it's anybody else's story, because we did that series. It goes all the way back to the Restorationist movement, the Puritans, and then the Zionism, which began with evangelicalism in Britain, and then of course Jewish Zionism, really was fronted by British Jews, and it was opposed mainly, or mostly, not most vociferously, by British Jews, some in the cabinet. So we did the whole Moses Montefiore thing. So it's a part of the story which has been left out, because everybody just goes to 1948, or even like 1917, the Balfour Declaration, which is really Israel's founding document. When it gets incorporated into international law, but it was really it was a British intention to do this, and then so I feel like there's the British story in all of that, which has been lost, and of course it's an empire story too, with the Anzacs, the Australian, New Zealanders. We don't want to leave them out, coming up, through the Battle of Beersheba and what have you. So that side, and of course then America comes into the Zionist movement much later, because America's not a world power in the 19th century. It's very much doing its own thing here, settling the continent, and so America really comes into its own and becomes sort of like Israel's major ally. Particularly after 1967, but obviously in 1948 you have the Truman, they're giving the recognition to the state. So, but it's an Anglo-American story, and of course I do include the Anglosphere in that, and the Anzacs in that, and what have you. So that's why I just feel that it's our story, which is why we got our flags here, and then we've got the state of Israel there.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And as we think about this, there's a couple of things I want to say up front. Is that the question is Israel an apartheid state? And you and I talking about this, we thought it would be a good idea, because you lived in South Africa for a while, and I'll have you talk about that. But before we even get into some of those details, it's just, you brought up earlier the idea of Zionism, because Zionism is going to have a part to play again in the conversation. And Zionism is, you got Jewish Zionism, you got evangelical Zionism, you got a lot of different flavors of it, but ultimately Zionism simply is a declaration that Israel, the modern state, or even the modern people of Israel, Jews, whatever, that they have a covenant with the land. This is a covenant that God gave back in Genesis 12, 13, 15, 17, reaffirmed in other places, Deuteronomy, that they have a covenant to the land, which again is part of what we discussed in the other series. But also, I just want to say as well that in discussing this, there are people that make claims that the modern Jews aren't real Jews, that they're Khazars. And if people, I just encourage people, if you want a fuller understanding of this, or maybe in how to do it, I created a site, or a page on our site, prophecywatchers.com/Jews. Made it real easy. Go there, and what I did there was I have an article by Tommy Ice from his great book, Zionism, Christian Zionism, and he does a whole chapter in there on the Khazar theory. Khazars did exist, but it's nonsense to think that all the Jews today are Khazars and not real, because we have genetics to prove otherwise. Secondly, people say that Israel, the term Israel, which appears over 2,500 times in the Bible, Hebrew and Jew are all different, and so these might be Israel, these might be Hebrews and Jews, and so they don't. And I wrote an article showing we covered every instance, not so much of Israel itself, because that's 2,500 times, but of the 2,500, you could see some characteristics. And then I took all those, and I did cover every appearance of the word Hebrew and Jew in the Bible, and show in Old Testament and New Testament. By the time you get to the end of looking at the data, they are synonyms. Clearly, they are 100% synonyms. Ultimately, of a Jew, Hebrew, or Israelite is someone who is a descendant of Jacob. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Not just Abraham, because that could include Ishmael and others. Not just Isaac, because that could include Esau, but Jacob himself. And so that's important. And then just one other thing before I transition here is that so as we recognize that the questions I've been asking lately, just in some of my presentations, is, does Israel belong in the land? Yes, they do. Absolutely, because of that covenant, the promises that God made. The second question is, does Israel deserve to be in the land? And the answer is no. Okay? And it's not a guess, but Deuteronomy 9 answers the question. Here's Moses before they're going into the land the first time. I mean, they haven't even got to the land yet. And God is telling them, you're not getting this land because you're righteous. So if that's in your head, you get it out. Because 3 times, 4 times, he's saying, it's not because you're righteous. It's not because you're righteous. In fact, you're a stubborn, stiff-necked people. It's because of my promise that I made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so if we clarify up front, that helps us to put right into practice that neither one of us believe Israel is a perfect nation, that they do everything right. But the core is, yes, they have a right to the land based on those promises. So within that now, you have in the church these 2 different extremes, which we won't get into. But on one side, you have Christians who allegedly love God. They're out preaching the gospel, but maybe they're covenant theologians or replacement theologians or fulfillment theology. They reject that there's a future for national Israel. And so many times they'll come in and they'll boycott Israel, the BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions. They'll say, again, they're not real Jews. And so we're trying to blunt some of that. They'll also emphasize very strongly against Israel's failures, which there are many. Tel Aviv is the gay capital of the Middle East. I mean, that's certainly not honoring to the Lord. And then on the other side, you have those that are vastly pro-Israel, but they won't evangelize them necessarily, and they hold back, and they're reluctant to criticize them. They're reluctant to be honest about Israel's imperfections. They're reluctant to be honest about their rejection of Jesus and their persecution of Christians in many ways. So you have those 2 extremes, but one of the accusations, and this is where I'll pass it over to you, one of the accusations is Israel is an apartheid state. And so, first of all, let's do this. I mean, people who are at least have some understanding of history recognize that one of the greatest places ever, the most prominent places ever in the history of the world to have apartheid is South Africa. So let's start. You maybe give a little bit of history of when you were there, what you experienced, and also to not only define but illustrate what apartheid is. And as you saw it, as you experienced it, as it is in law, as it was in practice, and then we can take that experience and even talk about the South African government, how they make accusations against Israel. I think all that was very well said. And then we'll take that and what? Is that what we're seeing in Israel?
Right.
And then we'll talk about some other things. So, floor is yours.
Okay, so thank you, Mondo. So, it's a word banded around like many other words, but people actually really don't know what went on there. And the people that do, I say, are being disingenuous when they compare the Israel situation to South Africa. So I was there really my formative years. My parents moved there when I was 10.
You were born where?
I was born in England, Manchester, England. Okay. So we did a little scooting around. We went to Australia for 3 years, came back, kind of didn't settle, so went out to South Africa. So this is like in the 70s, mid 70s, and we kind of like got there just as the Soweto riots really were sort of like kicking off. I think that was the following year. I think that was June '76, the Soweto riots. But of course, you go there as a young lad, you don't know anything. You're expected to see lions in the street, and you're going to Africa, right? And then we were taken to this little town. When we landed at the airport, those days it was Jan Smuts Airport, and we go into a place called Springs. Oh, it sounded wonderful. It was Springs.
And you were what, about 10?
So I was 10. Colorado Springs. That's how
Oh,
we
yeah,
go
of
to
course.
Springs.
Water, light. Yeah,
not a drop of water in sight.
Oh no.
There was no spring there. There were no lions there. But anyway, it was hot. It was humid, and because we were English, and so, we even suffered going through my schooling there, which is my formative years.
Mm-hmm.
When you're 10, you don't know anything. As you get older, then you begin to question. Certainly, as I'm coming out of the last couple of years of my schooling, so I leave school at 18. You realize something is very severely wrong here. And of course, I was a little bit persecuted by the Afrikaners there, because I'm still copying it for the Boer War, and it's like, okay, well, that was a while back now, so
It wasn't even you.
yeah, well, it wasn't me, sorry, it wasn't me. I didn't put Omar in concentration camp or anything. But anyway, so that aside, so I grew up in this system, and apartheid, it means separateness. It's a bit like holy, it means. It means separate development. So in other words, and it was institutionalized in law, in parliament, so the judiciary, but it was in culture, in education, in everything.
When did that get codified into law?
I believe so.
Not exact date, just roughly.
Yeah.
We're talking like 1600?
No. So 1948 is when the National Party, the ruling National Party, really sort of begins to put their foot down. The president who did it, I can't remember the date it was. So it was Hendrik Verwoerd, who I think was the prime minister who really set the apartheid laws.
So this is a white English guy.
Yeah.
Putting into law.
No, he's not English. He's an Afrikaner. He's a Boer. Yeah, so he's so South Africa.
So that's good. Yeah, help me understand.
Yeah,
I don't really know a lot about
South Africa had really two white communities, right?
Okay.
It had a white community which is kind of came out of the English settlers of 1820. They went to Cape Town, but it also had the settlers which came out of they were called the Boer Republics, but they came out of Holland. They were the Dutch.
Oh, okay.
Right. So so you had these, and they spoke a different language, Afrikaans. It was a mixture between Dutch and German, and then their own thing. And the English and the Boers fought. This is what the Boer Wars are about.
So you have two European groups fighting on the African continent, each other.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
that was so. The Boers moved further north, and settled a couple of provinces. One was called the Orange Free State. The other one was Transvaal, across the River Vaal. So that's kind of how that developed. But in South Africa itself, in the white education system, you had English-speaking schools, and you had Afrikaans-speaking schools.
Okay.
Now, if you were in an English-speaking school, that was like your mother tongue. That was your mother language. They weren't English people. They just came out of a different culture. Maybe came out of the 1820 settlers. And so you learned Afrikaans as a second language.
Oh, okay.
Right, which I had to learn, which I did not enjoy, And then you had what's called the Boers. So they were like the Afrikaners. They came straight out of that Dutch stream of settlers, which began in, I think it was, if I remember our history, 1620.
Wow.
I don't know what it was. It goes way back, 1656. I think April the 6th or something. It's all coming back to me, Mondo, as I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
I think it was there. A guy called Jan van Riebeck. He settled the colony there, and then the English moved in later on and took over. So you had this system. So within the white system, but then the Afrikaners then, and then they would learn it. So they would learn English, as a second language. So you were educated either in Afrikaans or you were educated in English, right? But the white community there had had de facto monopoly. I mean, it was institutionalized, whether you were coming from an English-speaking South African or an Afrikaans-speaking South African. And so that is what the apartheid system was about. Now, me as an Englishman, I had no political rights there. I had no I had a work visa or something like that. So go ahead.
So the separation was between the two white people?
Not really. I mean, there was cultural separation.
But that's not really what we're...
That's not apartheid, no.
Okay.
No, that's just like, that was just... that. So at the time I was there, if I remember the numbers, there were about 5 million whites, and I think there are about 20 million blacks.
Okay.
All right. So, and then you had an Indian population, you had a colored population. So the colored population is what they were called. They were like, they came really, they were called Cape Coloreds. So in other words, it's when the settlers earlier on, they began to intermarry with the blacks. And so they produced a mixed race.
Okay.
All right. And then you had the pure, tribal black tribes, of Africa.
Uh-huh.
So that's where the cultural distinction is. So when we talk about coloreds now, those are mixed race, right? Okay, so because some of them just took black wives or even not even taking them as wives, or would maybe have children through their black slaves, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you would have the coloreds,
so that's brings up a great point. So during this early time, there was slavery there.
Oh yes, there was slavery, but at the time of the, but certainly from the, there was discrimination, and certainly, I mean, the British Empire sort of put an end to the slave trade.
Okay.
If I get the dates, if I remember, it's about 1807. Thereabouts, through the actions of William Wilberforce. So they put their entire navy to completely demolish the transatlantic slave trade. So, but then Britain abolished slavery ownership itself, and I think that law was passed around about 1830 or 1833.
In all of its colonies?
Yes, it was completely. You could not so a slave. But obviously, the issue of slavery sort of continues.
Mm-hmm.
So Britain never fought a civil war like you guys did over slavery, because it became a national institution, a national endeavor to eradicate the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade. And then also slavery itself, ownership of slaves. So so South Africa, of course, developed. It was both an English and a Dutch colony. So this is where you get the bifurcation in terms of the cultural in the white section. Mm-hmm. You get the two groups of white, but the apartheid system was set up for white supremacy over every other color group.
Okay.
Right.
Roughly what year?
Well, again,
40s?
we're getting so 48, and I can't remember exactly when Verwoerd brought it in, but you're talking about post-war. But there was always like racial discrimination.
Sure,
But the system was legalized, the system was instituted, right? So this is now separate development, and of course, and then these apartheid laws, what they did, they enforced this particular separation. So you had a separate legal system, a judiciary. You had a separate education. I mean, everything was separate. I'll get into some of the practical details of it. But the when I was there in '84, I remember they were going to have a constitutional reforms, and they were. Yeah, I wasn't allowed to vote in that, but I remember it distinctly, because they wanted to change one system into another system. It's called the tricameral parliament that they had. And it's interesting because in this tricameral parliament, they had a 178-member White House of Assembly, right, which is called the single chamber. They had an 85-member coloured House of Representatives, and they had a 45-member House of Delegates. So... but the blacks, the African communities who were not coloured, who were not part of that mixed race, they had no political rights whatsoever. They had to carry passbooks. It was the cause of some riots, the Sharpeville riot in 1960. They had to. So if you were a black, you could not move freely. If you were black,
Oh, wow.
you simply could not move freely. Eventually, they came to create these what was called these Bantustans, where they're black homelands. They're overseen by the South African regime, as it were, but you're sort of you're I suppose maybe akin to something like a reservation,
Okay.
and you can have you do your own thing there, but you could not pass. You had no really freedom of travel. And a policeman and the police state, it was a police state in the end. It was brutal. I saw some of those cops, with what they did. They would whip them. They would do everything, and you had to show your passbook anywhere you went. But so you can see straight away that it's a rigged system, the 178 member white parliament, and of course, and then when they're doing the voting for the state president, they had this electoral college, but again it was rigged. I'm just getting the notes here. It was rigged for the whites because I think they had 55 members. Oh yeah, here we go. To elect the state president, he was to be selected from among the members of the tricameral parliament by an 88-member electoral college composed of 50 whites, 25 colours, and 13 Indians. Well, there's more whites than there are Indians and colours put together, right?
Yeah.
So you're never going to get a black president. You're never going to get an Indian president. You're never going to get a coloured president. It's rigged, and a lot of the coloured and the Indian representatives, I remember at that time, boycotted the elections. They wouldn't partake of it. I mean, it's the same with the judiciary. It was always like one law for them and one law for the other. But if you get into the practical aspects of apartheid, and we'll move quickly through this, I remember it's like living it. I got an education you could not pay for, but I got an education which was at the expense of a brutal system. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
You see how people treat each other. You see, and all for, because they thought they were the chosen people. So you had living arrangements. People were forced to live in designated areas based on race, for example. The Group Areas Act, I remember that, forced people of certain races to live in specific areas. In the white home, so you can have like, and I'm just going to use the terms that we used. Okay, it's not racist.
You're not racist, but you're using what the terms.
So you would have a maid or a servant, and you could maybe have servant quarters out the back of your house, but it was you wouldn't put your dog in there. I kept my rabbits in the servants' quarters.
Okay.
Right, but these were the servants' quarters. Maybe there was a flushing toilet there,
Maybe.
And so if you had a maid coming to your house, she could sleep overnight, but you had to get special sort of permission to do all this. And a lot of times the system was they would deliberately separate families. So they'd send the husband off to work, in the north of the country, in the mines somewhere, way away from his wife and his family. So divorce rates were high, everything like that.
So you're saying that so they're sending a black husband away from his black wife. Okay.
So
this is not talking about whites here.
No, this is all black. So but most of the blacks lived in townships, and the weirdest thing was, I remember growing up, you knew more about apartheid outside of South Africa than you did in, because it was the broadcasting company at the time, South African Broadcasting Company Corporation, it was controlled by the state.
Okay.
So we're going to tell you what you can see, what you can't see. And if you were white, you never went into a black township. I had a brother. I mean, I know he did a couple of times because he had a friend in there, but you just didn't go. This is called separate development. So when you're going through the schooling system, you have a better education than the blacks. They do get an education, but it's nothing like you got. So when you're going through the system, and imagine this, so you have a gentleman who's doing your garden, right? He's mowing the lawn or what have you. So you call the maid girl, and you call him boy, right? Okay. And he can be 60, he can be 50, it doesn't matter. And you're like a 3-year-old or 5-year-old just learning to speak.
But
and
that's what you'd call,
hey boy.
Okay.
Do you find it was absolutely evil and absolutely brutal and demeaning And
designed that way.
It was designed that way, but it's also designed that you didn't think anything was wrong. That you come through the education system, and they know their place. They don't get the vote. But they don't have to pay taxes either. Well, maybe they want to pay taxes because they want to vote. So because it's their country too. So it's this idea of white supremacy, and everything was segregated. I mean everything. I just remember the train carriages. You'd be on the same train, but you would have 2 carriages for whites, and you had maybe 4 carriages for blacks. All right. Education was completely segregated. The benches. Right? This is 70s, 80s until apartheid falls.
Okay.
All right. This is
not that long ago.
Yeah. You go into benches. You would have separate parks for whites and separate parks for blacks. You'd have separate beaches for whites. You'd have separate beaches for blacks. You'd see a bench with a sign "Net Blankers," which means Afrikaans for whites only. You can't sit on the same bench. You had separate entrances into shops and buildings. White. Again, that sign, blankers, net blankers, whites only through here. Obviously, you couldn't go into restaurants if you were black. You would because there were white only restaurants. Separate buses where you'd have white buses and black buses, but you wouldn't. It's not even separate buses. You'd have separate bus stops.
Okay.
They would stop. Here's the whites, on their bus. And of course, you had the nice bus, right?
Uh-huh.
So this is not even like riding in the back of the bus. This is like, no, we're not even going to do that. And then the black bus stop would be like further along, and they would be more rickety, that sort of thing. It was absolutely scandalous. And I remember as I got older in the schooling system, thinking there's something wrong here. There's something wrong with this. Because, you don't know anything at 10, you don't know anything at 11, 12. But, I'm getting to like 16, 17, and I'm thinking. And, of course, then they go into they're mandated to, I wasn't, they're mandated to go into the defense force, because they're going to fight, the communists, on the Angola, there was the Zimbabwe Rhodesian War, the Angola front, Mozambique, and what have you. So, It was absolutely awful, and when you look back now and you think about how, and here's the saddest thing is the blacks accepted it too. It's like
they were resigned.
They were resigned to this is it, and this is the reality. This is the reality, and nothing is going to change. And of course, we know sort of like what happened after that.
Well, kind of tell us when did this come to an head and a change, and what year? And
well, I left in '85 because they wanted to take away my British citizenship effectively, my pass, and they wanted to naturalize me, and they wanted to draft me into and I said, no, I'm not doing this. Sorry, I'm not fighting the wars to prop up this system. But so that was. But again, at that age, you're just becoming aware of things. So I know when people say, apartheid, people don't know. They're reading in the.
It's a word.
It's just a word, and this is why. I mean, the other thing, toilets, of course. I mean, you would never share a toilet with a black man. You would never sit on the same toilet seat as a black man. You wouldn't sit on the same bench. Are you kidding me?
Wow.
This is like. And they had this, I'm going to say it in Afrikaans if I can remember it, but they had this, somehow this, ons is die mense van die Here, we are the people of the Lord, we are the chosen.
Oh, they put a religious.
It was all religious, because I remember going to school and this is where I first became alive to the Word of God, but they would read the scriptures, and of course everything there had a bent to sort of prop up the system. But for me, of course, the Word of God came into a pure heart. I didn't know any of that.
Yeah.
But very religious,
Wow.
They had the national church. Then they had the Apostolic Faith Mission, and so they had all of this. And so it was, and they were having to suppress these riots, of course, time and time again, because there was just continuous. It was a system which was destined to fall. It had to fall. You could not maintain that system, and particularly then as nations began to put pressure on them. Yeah, I mean, it was a hierarchical system based on race, and the sop to the coloureds or the sop to the Indians. That's all it was. Oh yeah, you can also have a vote, but your vote is by sheer reference to the numbers we can give you as representatives. You're not going to overturn the white system.
Yep.
But then there was a guy called F.W. de Klerk, and he was the one who knew the writing was on the wall, to pick up a phrase, and he knew that. I mean, Mandela had been in prison for decades at this time, and of course we all saw that picture of Mandela, the very moving video of Mandela coming out, being released from prison, and effectively it was the end of white rule, that particular moment. That's apartheid, Mondo.
So let's take that and let's transfer it in our last 10 minutes here, 9 minutes. When we come to the state of Israel, you've been there, I've been there. We see their basic laws, not quite a constitution, but their foundation of government. We know that there's 73% of Israel is Israeli. 21% is Arab, and the rest are, the other 5% is just others. In the sense of the starkest, you mentioned this earlier, that today people in South Africa, government, they're making claims against Israel about being apartheid. Talk about that. I mean,
yeah, I mean,
how are they able to do this?
I don't know. Is a short answer, but I think so. Nelson Mandela. So he's an interesting character, and he set. I've got some quotes from here because he kind of set the cause of South Africa. He's set the cause of the Palestinian cause to the South African cause. All right, He says that, here's what Mandela said. He said, "We identify with the PLO because just like ourselves, they are fighting for the right of self-determination. Arafat is a comrade in arms, and we treat him as such. Our freedom is incomplete," Mandela says, "without the freedom of the Palestinians." There's another quote here. So when he goes to Gaza, Mandela, and he says he feels at home amongst compatriots. And then when Mandela died, Arafat dies, 11th of November 2004, Nelson Mandela, who's a great man. We're not denigrating Nelson Mandela. But he was, he had a way. This is what he thought. Mandela paid tribute to the Palestinian leader who he hailed as an icon. Here's what he said. "He was an icon in the proper sense of the word. He was not only concerned with the liberation of the Arab people, but all of the oppressed people throughout the world, Arabs and non-Arabs. And to lose a man of that stature and thinking is a great blow to all those who are fighting against oppression." So the apartheid story continues for the South African, the black, South African government regime people, that we're now fighting in Palestine. And I think that's how they've made the link. But like you said, I've been to Israel. I've lived in South Africa. It's just not. I mean, it's not. We could talk about how Israel does have some constitutional problems and a constitutional crisis. And maybe we should just
But let's
go on to that maybe.
We can, and I think, but when we go to Israel, I don't see the Palestinian bus company for only Arabs, or the Arab bus company, the Hebrew bus company. I don't see different benches. I see them mingling in restaurants.
Yes.
So for people to throw that label on Israel, first, what you just said is absolutely ludicrous. It does not reflect the origination of the word in its starkest sense. Would you say then, is there a 1% apartheid in Israel? I mean, is it, it's easy to be inflammatory and just throw a word around.
Yeah.
As you said, Israel is not perfect. They have room to grow in areas. But what percentage of apartheid do we need to get to where it becomes apartheid? I don't really know the answer to that. But the fact of the matter is, again, what you just described, I've never seen there. And, again, being there many times, it's just simply not true. But that's the way inflammatory language works. And as we know, even praising Arafat is extremely problematic.
Well, he proscribed terrorist organizations.
Yeah, he's a murderer. Right?
Yeah,
He's absolutely an intentional murderer of innocent people, and the more the better. And this is where you often see the case, and maybe you could speak on it for a moment. Is do you see then? I saw a few years ago, and I can't say I'm an expert by any means, but I saw where there was according in South Africa, there was an attempt to repatriate the white farmers, the farms of white people.
Yeah.
I don't know if you heard about that, but do you think that now there's a reverse, that there is a, like, we're going to get vengeance or reparations for all the time, and so it's kind of turned back? Is there racism against white people now in South Africa?
Yeah, I mean, racism has always existed, of course. So we're talking about an apartheid system. We're talking about a legalized system. Doubtless there's racism in Israel. There's racism here. There's racism in my nation, you know, because it's in the heart of man in a sense. There were some problems in terms of the confiscation of farms, and it turned very violent. A lot of murders, a lot of South African whites murdered. And so I think you do get the vengeance aspect of things. You know, now's the day of vengeance, and this is now we're going to take back what you took from us or what you stole from us. So they have their, I suppose they have their own journey. But I know it's been, the reports I've read, it's been pretty horrific for the farmers.
So let me bring this up, going back to Israel, is you have Israel being founded as a Jewish state.
Yes.
Under the banner of being a democratic state.
Yes.
So democratic by definition is the people vote. And so what you do see recently, back in 2018, there was a law that was passed, basically the nation state law, which defined Jewish nationalism as being the highest order, that Israel will always be a Jewish state. It'll never be an Arab state. It cannot be an Arab state. There's plenty of those. But people say, well, yeah, but if there's enough Arabs, if they become 58% or 51%, and then they vote to make it a Jewish state or an Arab state, that's the role of democracy. But yet Israel now is saying that'll never happen. And so they're being accused of being undemocratic with this law. So in one sense, this is kind of what we were talking about, is that this is the Israel dilemma in some ways, that in one ways they can't be full democratic. Even the United States is not a full democracy. But in that sense, they can't be a full democracy. They are choosing, and this is what they chose, to be a Jewish state. And of course the ramifications, what that looks like for voting. Now, as far as I can see and what I've read and everything, and even as we talked about the Supreme Court in Israel, they said, no, this law is not unconstitutional. The national determination will always be Jewish, but it doesn't take away from the rights of the average Arab Israeli to go and do his job and vote and everything. He can have parties, but they can never vote for it not to be a Jewish state. So it's kind of the one thing that's off limits for anybody. Imagine if all the Jews decided we're going to vote this to be, they can't do that.
So here's the problem. The state of Israel, because it is birthed out of the British parliamentary system, is based on the British parliamentary model. They don't actually have a written constitution, okay, like we don't. Not in the same way that the US does. It's there in a document, and we got to fight over that. And they they've always wanted to get around to write the Constitution, but two things have stopped them doing it. Number one, because all the people are not in the land to consult for the constitutions. Obviously, talk about Jewish people in the land. And also because of all the wars they fought. It's just one war after the other. And they kind of said, well, the British have got along without having a written constitution in one document. Therefore, we can get along too. So there is that aspect. And of course, then their law system, like the United States law system, is based on English common law, right? So that's their legacy, that's their inheritance, that's their legacy. I think. But when you get into how do you legally deal with the Palestinian, let's just call it the Palestinian side, the issue the cause of, can you give them votes, and how, and then what does that vote mean? And of course, so had the whole concept of the Greater Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a dilemma for Israel for sure constitutionally, and we know it's going to exist all the way until the one who is going to come with the law, and it won't be English common law.
Nope.
It will be a kingdom law of their Messiah coming from Jerusalem to all, not just for Israel, but for all the nations.
Yep.
So we look forward to that day. But in the meantime, I mean, could I say that the specter of apartheid is hanging over Israel? And what I mean by that is because of its constitutional issues that how do you resolve it? So just talk about that briefly. So how do you resolve this? So if you have the Greater Israel thing, you got like what was it, 5 million Palestinians in Judea, Samaria, and you want to bring them in.
And you want to annex it and bring them in as citizens?
You can't do it.
Can't.
So then you just have to keep kicking this can down the road, and then you have somebody, people sort of like balk at this, the two-state solution and say, well, it's dead. It's dead. It's always been dead, right? But it's the only game in town because what are you going to do? So the British considered the two-state solution in 1936 with the Peel Commission and decided 36-37 and decided he thought, well, this is the way it's only going to be, two states. But the British government at the time said no, because we'll have to displace so many Arabs. And it's all rooted in the Balfour Declaration, of course. Then that can was kicked by the British to the United Nations because they said, well, we can't solve this. So, well, we'll do the two-state solution as well.
1947.
And so let's divide it up and what have you.
The Jews said yes.
The Jews said yes.
And the Arabs said no.
The Arabs said no. But even in the time of the mandate, I remember it was Chaim Weizmann. He was friendly terms with I think it's Faisal, and he was anticipating there was the idea of the Greater Syria, and he was anticipating a Jewish protectorate under a Greater Syria, so an Arab ruling the Jews. So even they were trying to figure this problem out all the way back then. So you do have this situation. So really, even for Israel itself, I don't see any solution other than a two-state solution, right? Just because they don't want to annex.
They can't.
They can't annex any. I mean, I know some of the setup, but because what do you do? So the argument, can Israel be both a Jewish state and a democratic state? That's been going on since its birth. Can it be either one or both? So, and it was interesting what we were talking earlier about the nation-state law, and the Supreme Court was split. Well, it wasn't split. It was 10-1. It was
They were looking at this law. Whether this law, this nation-state law, says it's only can be Jewish and you can only vote. So unlimited, is this constitutional? And
does it? Yeah.
10 said yes.
But they were the 10 Jewish.
They were the 10 Jews,
justices, and the one Arab justice said no, it violates the Constitution. So what we have there in any judicial system, you have dissenting opinions like you do here, because of conservative liberal. But there you have a split between the Jewish and the Arab. In other words, an Arab judge, and he's come to this conclusion. No, this is unconstitutional. So obviously the court's ruling it is constitutional, but it's really interesting the demographic, the ethnic split there is still there between the Jew and the Arab. And how is that resolved? So I know people say about the two. I'm not in favor of the two-state solution. All I'm saying
is practically
it's the only game in town, even for the state of Israel, because they can't, they don't want to annex. So what are they? They want to keep it obviously disputed territory, and the world says it's occupied territory. They say it's disputed. So we'll keep it disputed for how long? Well, it's been disputed since 1967, and so we know that none of this is going to get resolved in the UN or the Security Council.
They've created an impossible scenario.
It's an impossible scenario. So so we're waiting for the Messiah of Israel, but it's just again, it's more complicated, I think, than people think.
Because I'll just say this as we end here, is that even as you have Israel becoming more religious in its government, it never wants to be, those religious people never wants to be the government that makes the decision for a two-state solution that gives up Samaria and parts of Judea forever to an Arab state. They don't want that on their shoulders because they have a religious bent to it. They understand the covenants of God that He gave it.
Yeah.
And so Joel 3:2, God's upset, those who divide my land. So this is where it is. I think, this has been a great conversation in saying that, again, Israel is not apartheid. If you lived it, you know it. And it also is a Jewish state, and in most senses, it is democratic, but it can never be purely democratic. By definition, it cannot, because of its decisive decision to say we will always be a Jewish state no matter what, and that will never is ever able to be voted out, which means, again, by definition, then it's not purely democratic in its fullest sense. Well, anyways, Graham, we got to get you back to your homeland, but it's been great this time. Thank you, everybody, for listening today. I hope this was helpful, just again to see the history. And here we are. We're looking forward to the Lord. We're looking forward to the King, King Jesus, to come back as the Messiah and to solve all of this.
Amen.
Amen.